The first heat of the day lay across my bench like a thin sheet of glass. Flux dried in pale rings on the steel block. A half-braided band waited under the lamp, its edges just beginning to glow when my phone shivered across the tray of gravers. I caught it before it toppled the tweezers. The caller ID made my fingers pause Lena. She almost never dialed me outright. When she did, it was for spectacle. Nell Nor, she sang, stretching my name as if she were calling an audience to attention. Breath slipped out of her in little bursts. Back from Switzerland, you would have adored the boutiques in the old town, the dinners, the mountains, oh, the mountains. And well, I thought you should know. Her voice bright and sweet as lacquer. I love spending your $80,000. For a full heartbeat, I heard only the cold tick of the wall clock behind the polishing motor. 80,000. She let the number float weightless. My 80,000. There was nothing like that sitting anywhere a hand could reach. I steadied my breath the way I do before soldering a seam slow and slower out, until the scorch of surprise thinned enough to listen. Lena continued without waiting for a reply, giddy with her own narrative. She described the lake light in Luzerne, the concierge, who remembered her name the way a maitre d' in Basel guided her to a window table as if she were diplomatic royalty. She tripped through labels of leather and silk, through tasting menus with French names she rounded off like pearls. I murmured once a neutral acknowledgement fit for strangers on a long bus ride. Nothing in my voice betrayed the calculation unspooling in my head. No envelope in the house, no stash at the studio, no rainy day jar tucked inside the kiln cabinet. Not in decades. Cash belonged to the ledger, not to the air. I learned that after my husband died and the bottom fell out beneath us with no warning. Back then I took a folding table to Saturday markets near the Pisgah turnoff and county fairs that smelled of kettle corn and dust. Some weeks I came home with $60 and a new sunburn, other weeks with enough to make the mortgage shy. Either way, I changed my shoes, counted every bill, and drove to the credit union on Maple Street before the teller's light went dark. I did not leave money in drawers. Money in drawers disappears. Anyway, Lena sighed, satisfied. I just wanted you to hear it from me. What your money bought memories. The line snapped off with a cheerful little chime. The room settled around the silence like a fitted lid. I set the torch handle down and tried to lift the band again, but my hands refused the steadiness a good joint requires. The silver looked suddenly too bright, all edge and glare. I dusted off the bench, squared the files, and was repointing a burr when a soft, practical knock came from the stairwell door. A courier stood on the landing helmet under his arm, a branded envelope balanced on his palm. "For Ms. Eleanor Vale," he said, reading the label as if to be sure I truly existed. I signed his tablet, thanked him, and brought the envelope to the bench where the light was strongest. Inside were receipt slips as crisp as new bandages. Swiss boutiques, hotel folios, a pair of jewelry houses whose names I recognized for their audacity. My name in tidy type appeared on each summary. The totals tilted the page. For a moment the columns blurred, then sharpened again. Room charges in Zürich, a shopping tour in Bern duty-free. Extravagances with numbers that didn't look real in ink. A cold clarity tugged at the base of my skull. I reached for the drawer where I keep the current ledgers. The old oak sticks in summer. It did not disappoint. The brass pull warmed under my thumb. When the drawer let go, it did so, with a little groan that made me think ridiculously of doors waking in old houses. Inside lay my loop, 2 rolls of polishing cloth, and the paper spine of my sales book. Files in soft gray sleeves leaned in an obedient row, each labeled in my own hand, vendors, invoices, tax shows. Tools, not treasure. Nothing that crinkled like cash. Lena had said she found it in a drawer. She used the word the way a child does when they stumble on a secret drawer, as if the mere idea could conjure money out of wood. The word spun me backward to those lean years after my husband's heart failed between dinner and dishes, and Evan small than hair too long. In the summer heat, stood in the doorway, gripping a glass of water and not understanding why the room felt empty. I made bracelets on the couch after he fell asleep and filed bezel seats at the kitchen table in the hour before the dawn bowl of coffee. When I sold a piece, I wrote it down. When I accepted cash, I walked it to the teller before the kettle cooled. Nora, my neighbor turned friend, folded into that routine years later when the side labor became a business that needed a spine. She took one look at my shoebox of receipts and bought me proper binders. Money is bread in August, she told me, setting a label maker in my hand. Leave it out and it invites ruin. Since then, the only bills I've kept inside the house were small change for shows and a bit of petty cash for shipping tape and lunch. 200 at most, tucked under a stapler in a tin that once held shortbread, more out of habit than necessity. I would no sooner stack 10,000 in a drawer than I would leave a ruby in the garden. I spread the Swiss slips across the bench mat, the way I sometimes spread gemstones after a buying trip, rows then clusters, then by color. The pattern didn't comfort so much as instruct. The last 4 digits on one summary matched the next, an account number that did not belong to any card in my name. The fonts felt foreign, the merchant codes unfamiliar. My name had been used like a shell. I pressed the heel of my palm to the table until the small bones in my wrist complained, then let go. In this town, work lives or dies on 2 tracks: what you make and how you carry yourself making it. Hendersonville is not a city of brutal declarations. It will close a door gently and pretend it was never there. When I first moved the studio out of our garage and into the 2nd floor of the brick building above the bakery, I learned to split my days hammer and torch and buffing compound until late afternoon. Then a clean blouse, a comb through my hair, and a glass raised at a gallery opening or a handshake at the Grand Laurel Hotel bar, where the chamber mixers hum under chandelier light. The wine wasn't indulgence, it was admission. The smile wasn't pretense, it was vocabulary. People remember the way you show up. Sometimes that's a necklace under the lamp. Sometimes it's a name in a room. Lena saw only the surface of those rooms. She called them costume parties and rolled her eyes when I bought a black jacket that did not wrinkle on car seats. Must be nice, she would say, sharpened to make it a little unkind. She kept a ledger of her own in the air, one in which appearances always meant luxury, and any effort spent on presentation proved the existence of something soft and undeserved beneath. She did not see the contracts that follow a well-timed introduction or the gallery slot that opens, because you made a reliable impression at every reception for a year. She did not see that the same discipline that keeps a solder score clean keeps a ledger clean. She preferred the theater of assuming. The torch on my bench had cooled while I read. My shop smelled faintly of cotton and ash. Outside, a delivery truck ground its way past the bakery's loading door. The bell they hang above the stairwell flicked once in the vibration. I took up the receipts again, flipped them each face down, and stacked them square until the pile behaved. Whatever Lena had found, it wasn't mine. I reached for my notebook and wrote the date in the top corner. Beneath it, one steady line: receipts received, Swiss merchants, my name printed, but account numbers unfamiliar. The words looked like a wire I had pulled straight. If there's anything years at a bench teach you, it is that a clean line can carry weight you thought only iron could manage. The band on the tray had cooled to a duller gray, the seam waiting. I turned the lamp down a notch, wiped the joint with a bit of alcohol, and set the piece aside. Some work demands attention you cannot give it until the room itself settles. I lifted the envelope, returned the receipts, and slid the packet into the gray sleeve labeled Invoices. Not because it belonged there, but because everything on my bench must belong somewhere until it can be set right. From the window, I could see a sliver of Main Street through the elm leaves. People drifted under the awning buying bread and gossip. I stood a moment in the quiet, hands finally still, breath even, and reminded myself of the oldest habit I own: when something claims to be yours, test it. Metal tells the truth under heat. Paper tells the truth under light. I moved the envelope a fraction until the grain flashed. Then I turned off the lamp. I left the lamp off and stood still long enough for the room to return to its ordinary scale bench vice window, the square of sun edging down the floorboards toward the door. Then I carried the envelope to the small office at the back, where the file cabinet sits under the window like a faithful dog. I slid the packet into the Invoices drawer, shut the metal with a practiced palm, and only then did I hear the old wall clock step past 5. Evan had a key. He seldom used it without knocking. That evening he rapped twice on the stairwell door and called my name through the frame, a habit from childhood that survived every apartment and job he'd cycled through before he came home to help with the studio. His voice sounded tired in a way that pulled at the softest part of me. "In here," I said. He took in the bench, the clear mat, the closed lamp, my tells. "You're not working?" I said, and tipped my head toward the office. A courier came. He followed me into the narrow room. I opened the drawer and set the envelope on the desk without ceremony. He didn't reach for it. He read my face first, then the branded flap, then the Swiss postmark I'd left peeking from the crease. "Lena called," I said. The name made his jaw shift. He rubbed the bridge of his nose in the old way. "She said she spent $80,000 of mine. Then these arrived receipts. My name is on them. The numbers aren't mine." He dragged a chair up and sat elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the blotter as if it could bless him with a clean page. For a moment, the only sound was the pebbled tick of the clock and the bakery's mixer 2 floors below thrumming like distant weather. "I should have told you sooner," he said. He didn't continue, and I didn't feel the silence. It was the same pause I hold over metal before it takes heat, the measured second where the work decides whether to accept what's coming. "Start where it starts," I said. He nodded once. "Not with her call," he said. "Before that. There had been a clean, bright Thursday in early spring when an email slid into the studio account from a man named Klaus Meyer with a Zürich address and a gallery letterhead I'd heard spoken with respect by artists better known than me. He wrote briefly 2 sentences that felt like a door opening. He'd seen my work through a small importer in Atlanta, admired the restraint of the settings, wondered if I would consider a capsule presentation during a summer showcase on Limit Quay. He attached a PDF with terms and photographs of the Space White Walls room to breathe. I'd read the email twice, then again, and then I had walked to the doorway where Evan was crating a light box and put my hand on the jamb to steady myself. "Come read this," I'd said, and he had, and for a minute he let his head fall forward onto the crate lid and laughed in a way I hadn't heard from him since he was a boy, with a kite tugging clean air. We worked through lunch that day and the next, mapping how a small studio in Hendersonville moves work across an ocean without apology. We spoke with a customs broker Nora recommended. We measured and weighed and priced until there was no glitter left, only numbers that could stand upright. In the evenings, I scrubbed the bench shine from my hands and put on the jacket that didn't wrinkle and let myself be seen in rooms where rooms decide things. It felt like the right kind of labor, no shortcuts, no slant. Lena overheard us planning one night when she came by for Evan and found us sitting cross-legged on the floor with the display boards spread like quilts. "Zurich," she said, as if someone had finally remembered to invite her to her own party. "Finally, something proper. I should come. I can talk about the brand. People need a face." Her tone was light, but the edge underneath had teeth. Evan tried kindness first. "It's work," he said. "We can't have distractions. There's too much to keep straight." Distractions, she repeated softer, as if tasting the word, to see whether it would serve her later. She looked at the boards again, the clean photographs and sketched floor plan. "You'll be in photo calls, openings, dinners. That's not work, that's costume. I could help with that." I had learned that no good argument survives a room that isn't ready to hear it. I said nothing. Evan reached for his wallet and put it back, a small, useless gesture that made him look young. A week later, Lena posted a picture of herself at the Grand Laurel Bar with a caption about manifesting summer in Europe. Evan saw it when he came upstairs to ask whether we should switch the Riverstone bracelet findings to a slimmer clasp for the Swiss market. He didn't show me the photo. He placed his palm on the desk and breathed as if the room had become a belt around his chest. That was when he tried to fold her into the edges of the business where she could do no harm. He offered her a small studio card with a strict ceiling. "Flowers for the booth," he'd said, "packing tape, a bag if you're coming to an opening and don't have something that matches your shoes." He said it with a smile so it wouldn't sound like a rule. Within 10 days, the statement showed a spa package, a handbag, whose cost could have outfitted a year's worth of window displays and 2 dinners at a restaurant I couldn't afford to be seen liking. Evan closed the card before the cycle turned over and paid the balance himself. He kept the receipt folded in his pocket for a week as if it were a talisman against something worse. They fought. I knew it by the careful way Evan moved around noise afterward, stacking boxes with the hush of someone who doesn't want to wake shoes in a closet. When Lena came by, she was polite to me and a little too bright. She brought macaroons in a ribboned box and set them on the bench without looking at the work. We kept building the capsule. 2 evenings later, after I had confirmed the broker and packed the first parcel list, Evan spoke into the quiet of the office. What would it take, he asked, to give her something separate, not from the studio? From me. A vacation? So she can have whatever it is she thinks she's missing. So she's not inventing reasons to stand in front of the work. "You can't buy your way out of weather," I said. "I know," he rubbed his jaw, "but I can buy time." He could, and he did. He booked her flights in a room by the lake in Luzerne, with a view of the water she could name later in photographs. He bought a second leg for a few days in Zurich, which felt on paper like kindness even if it made my stomach turn over with unease. He told her plainly 1 week on his dime. "The rest is up to you." The triumph in her eyes when she scrolled through the confirmation emails made me feel unfairly and unhelpfully, as if I had handed a sharp tool to a child. She snapped a picture at the airport lounge before boarding and tagged no one, which was its own kind of announcement. We turned back to work. The calendar fit its squares around us. Then the call came, the one I'd answered at the bench, while the torch cooled the one where she stretched my name and said she had loved spending my $80,000. I didn't sleep the night after the receipts arrived. The brain given a number and a face makes a stage. I lay awake listening to a truck idle down on Main, to the ice machine in the bakery, knocking its shoulder against the bin. I got up before Light made coffee and polished a ring I'd already polished twice. At 9, I wiped the bench, put the ring back in its tray, and opened the office window to let the room breathe. Evan's knock that evening, the way his voice dragged, the way his first sentence frayed, those belonged to the same day as the call, even if the truth he carried had started somewhere weeks earlier. He still hadn't touched the envelope. He looked at me instead. "She didn't spend your money," he said. "She spent mine." He said it without rescue. No false cheer, no framing that might break her fall. I pulled 80 from my savings, he went on, and he lifted a hand palm open, Not to swear to anything but to keep the words measured. A cashier's check. Not from the studio. I needed a clean line through the debt before the Swiss shipping dates. She'd stacked cards. I wanted... He stopped, gathered himself, tried again. I wanted the ledger clean. I didn't want anyone looking at our books and finding her mess and thinking it was ours. He glanced at the window as if a more patient word might be written on the glass. I put it in a locked drawer at the Ashford Row townhouse. Mine. No one uses it. A place she wouldn't think to look. I meant to meet with her creditors and pay them directly. I was waiting on a final list. His mouth tightened. She found the drawer. How? I don't know. He laughed once in a way that hurt to hear. She finds things. Maybe she still had the old code. Maybe I left a key in a jacket pocket in a moment of inattention. Maybe she looked until the house ran out of places to say no. He told it plainly. No excuses, no quick blame to throw like a smoke bomb. The facts lined up and held. She had a card she used overseas, he said. Some kind of travel wallet. She called me from a number I didn't recognize and told me not to be dramatic. She said that if the money wasn't meant for her, it wouldn't have been sitting there. In the office light, his face looked older around the eyes, the way a sky shows weather long after the storm has moved on. He turned the envelope so the flap pointed toward me. I know what this looks like. I know what it is. I should have told you the day I took the cashier's check. I was afraid you'd think less of me for tying myself to someone who makes mess a full-time job. I placed my hand on the blotter between us. The leather had a nick near the top edge where a compass point bit down, years ago, a tiny flaw smoothed by time until it was almost polished. You tried to protect the work, I said. He made a small sound that was not agreement and not refusal, or myself, he said, or both. The clock stated another minute. Downstairs the mixer stopped, a voice laughed and another answered. A door swung and the stairwell bell flicked once and was still. Whatever she found, I said she knew not to find it. He nodded, stare dropping to his hands. He is not a man who cries. He never learned how. But he picked at the line between thumb and forefinger until the skin went pale. We sat there with the number in the air between us, the way metal sits on a third hand, while you weigh whether the heat will hold the seam. He looked up finally and met my eyes with a steadiness that said he was done buying time. I can fix what's mine, he said. I just needed you to know which part that is. I reached for the envelope, slid the receipts back inside, squared the corners, and set them down with the quiet a bench requires. The office held itself upright. The drawer was locked. The lamp was off. The sun had fallen to the baseboard and was washing the last of its color out of the floor. Then we start with the truth we have, I said. And that was enough for the room to breathe. Nora arrived the next morning with her leather folio and the same look she brings to cluttered bookshelves appraisal without panic. She hung her cardigan on the peg by the office door, pushed her glasses up, and asked for tea, the way she always does when a conversation needs both hands. I set the kettle on the hot plate and laid the Swiss receipts across the blotter in 3 even rows. She didn't comment on the brand names or the totals. She traced the last 4 digits at the bottoms of the slips with a pencil eraser, murmuring them under her breath, until the repetition logged somewhere behind her eyes. Not your credit union range, she said after a minute, as if confirming the color of a stone. And not a domestic bank you've ever used. She tapped a merchant code with the point of her pencil. See that sequence? These clear through a travel wallet. One of those cross-border apps that issues a shadow card. Easy to load, easy to drain, very tidy on paper. Evan leaned against the door jamb with his arms folded. She had one when she went to Montreal with her sister, he said, a fact produced like a coin he'd forgotten in a pocket. Said the fees were better. I didn't think about it again. Nora nodded already, assembling a spine out of disparate parts. She listed what we had copy of Evan's cashier's check stub from his savings withdrawal, the date and amount, the timeline of Lena's trip, the receipts bearing my name but not my account, Evan's statement about the drawer at the Ashford Row townhouse. She wrote each item on a clean sheet and underlined every date. What does my name do there? I asked, touching the typed Eleanor Vale at the top of a hotel folio. It doesn't belong to any number on the page. It doesn't have to, Nora said. A name satisfies a clerk when a card, face matches an ID, or when a reservation was made under a name that looks proper to a room. The system likes names. It doesn't require them to line up with the money. I poured tea and set her mug on a coaster. The office felt smaller with language making rails through it. Evan didn't sit. He planted his feet and kept his hands on his elbows like a man keeping warm in gentle weather. I put the cash in the drawer because I could control it there, he said. I thought I could walk it to the collectors myself and keep our books clean. That's the part I can't stop replaying. You're replaying the wrong thing, Nora said, not unkindly. Control fails. That's its nature. What matters is the trail. She flipped a receipt to show the authorization code on the back. These are excellent trails. The kettle clicked empty sooner than it should have. I filled it again to have something to do with my hands. Evan's phone buzzed face down on the desk. He let it go once, then again. On the third, he turned it over and set it to speaker before he could change his mind. Lena's voice came out bright and brittle the way sugar snaps in frost. "Don't make a spectacle," she said. It was sitting in a drawer. Why put money somewhere people can find it if you don't want it touched? And anyway, I've been promoting her work for years. My time has value. You think posts write themselves? Nora's pencil stopped moving. You took money that wasn't yours, Evan said. His voice had none of the soft padding he sometimes uses when he's afraid the room will break. It was meant for creditors, not for handbags, not for spas, not for rooms with views. Creditor is such a dramatic word, Lena said with a laugh that wasn't a laugh. I'm the one who learned how to speak about the brand so people felt something. That has a price. I collected it. If you didn't want me to, you should have hidden the money better. I felt my hands go still on the counter. Lena, I said, keeping my tone level, you put my name on bills that don't belong to my accounts. Because your name opens doors, she said. You're welcome. Then she hung up. We listened to the small quiet a phone leaves behind. Nora slid her glasses up and set the pencil down. All right, she said. No disputes about intent, no confusion about use. We keep the paper straight. She drafted the letter in my voice because mine would have too much heat. She dated it and gave it a clear subject line, misuse of funds and required remediation. In clean short paragraphs, she wrote what happened as if she were describing a setting without sentiment, the withdrawal from Evan's personal savings, the purpose designated for debt settlement, the storage for scheduling, the unauthorized access, the conversion to a travel wallet, the charges in Switzerland, the receipts bearing my name without my account. She wrote what we required, either a signed admission and a repayment schedule to return the full amount in increments that met the judgment thresholds, or the matter would be referred to law enforcement with the attached documentation. She avoided embellishment. She used my legal name twice and spelled Lena's with care. At the end, she left a line for signatures and a date. Boundary letter makes it sound gentler than it is, she said, reading it through once more. But it is a boundary, a door that closes only if someone refuses to step through it. I read the page and felt a steadiness I recognized from good metal. The sentences held their shapes. Send it certified and send a PDF to her email, Nora said. No one later says it never arrived. We sealed the envelope. Evan squared the corners on the desk blotter as if alignment could persuade a day to behave. I walked the letter to the post office myself. On the way back under the elm canopy on Main, I met two people I know from the Arts Alliance. We exchanged the kind of greetings Hendersonville is built to provide warm, quick nothing of consequence. If there was a tremor under my smile, the leaves kept it. That evening I polished a cuff until the cloth came away black, then gray, then nearly clean. The work steadied me the way a railing steadies a staircase in the dark. 2 days later, a reply came not from Lena, but from a legal clinic on Willow Avenue, their letterhead half an inch of ink and line drawings of scales. An intern wrote that Lena requested a mediation session for a family financial dispute and proposed 3 possible dates. The name at the bottom, the supervising attorney, rang a small bell from a chamber breakfast years back. Nora read the note over my shoulder and said, "Good." Rooms like that make sentences sit up straight. We picked a time. When the day came, we walked up the cracked steps past a planter full of marigolds that had outgrown their intention. The waiting room had 2 tables of pamphlets, debt and tenant rights, small claims basics. A poster on the wall showed a river with guidance printed over the bend. Begin with what is known. I felt oddly at home. Lena arrived 5 minutes late with a coat too fine for August and a perfume that made the air feel expensive. She didn't look at me. She looked at her watch, then at the door to the conference room as if entry were the point and not the conversation. When we were called, she went in first and sat where the window would light her profile. The mediator introduced herself Ms. Albright Compact, with a voice like the click of a well-made clasp. She explained her role in words that felt practiced but not rote. We're here to seek a resolution that reflects the reality of what happened, she said. Not to adjudicate guilt. Honesty will reduce the friction. Nora opened her folio and slid copies across the table in the order she'd written them on the sheet in my office. The cashier's check stub, the withdrawal slip from Evan's savings, the timeline, the receipts from Switzerland, a printout of the email that sent the PDF of our boundary letter, and the certified mail receipt with Lena's signature slanting across the little box like a twig. Ms. Albright read. She didn't rush. She lined the documents with the edge of her hand and straightened a corner when it tried to misbehave. Then she looked at Lena. Do you dispute that these funds originated in Mr. Vale's personal savings, she asked. Lena crossed one leg over the other and smoothed the coat. Money is household when households are involved, she said. I've given my time to their business for years. I've posted. I've networked. That labor has value. I chose to take it in a way that didn't require more begging. Ms. Albright nodded once, a motion that looked like a door allowed to close softly. Do you dispute that the funds were designated for debt settlement, not personal travel? I dispute your framing, Lena said. Do you dispute that you accessed a drawer at a property you do not occupy, removed cash, loaded it to a travel wallet, and used it abroad? Ms. Albright's voice did not change. Lena held her posture. It was in a drawer. It wasn't locked like a bank, she said, and then caught herself. It was a drawer. That's not a legal term. It can still be theft. Ms. Albright said, not as a threat, but as a statement of category. She turned to Evan. Mr. Vale, what are you asking for in terms of remedy? Evan kept his hands on his knees. An admission in writing of what occurred, he said, return of the funds on a schedule that reflects ability to pay but acknowledges the full amount and surrender of any luxury goods purchased with the cash so they can be resold toward the balance. Nora slid a second page forward, simple with 3 lines and a place for a signature. This mirrors the letter already sent, she said. If signed, we coordinate payouts through the clinic so we're not managing this in our home. Lena laughed at short and bright. I'm not signing to make your narrative neat, she said. You set a trap and now you want me to compliment the workmanship. No, Evan said. We want you to stop taking what isn't yours. Lena stood so quickly the chair legs squawked against the carpet grip. For the first time, she looked fully at me. Her eyes held a heat I recognized from rooms where people pretend they're cold. You never wanted me in the picture, she said. Your fonts, your jackets, your rooms. You like to be the face. I tried to help. I took what I was owed. She shifted her bag higher on her shoulder and reached for the door. I won't sit here while you audition your righteousness, she said to no one in particular, and then she was gone, her perfume and a small disarrangement of air all that remained. The door settled into its frame with a sound that felt like punctuation. Ms. Albright didn't sigh. She gathered the copies, stacked them square, and slid them back toward Nora. You have documentation for a report if you choose to file, she said, and you've made an offer of structured repayment that is clear. If she returns to the table, you can pick it up again without re-arguing definitions. She paused, not for drama, but because words needed a place to land. Is there anything else you need from me today? No, I said. My voice surprised me by being steady. Thank you. Outside, the marigolds along the steps burned quietly in their boxes. Evan stood with both hands on the rail as if the metal knew more than he did. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. We walked back to the car without hurrying, the sun laid flat across the street, the air holding the day like a bowl. At the studio, I unlocked the office and set the folder in the cabinet where the important things live. The drawer slid home on its rails with a small metal hymn. Evan took the chair by the door. Nora stood in the threshold and rolled her pencil between her fingers until the graphite smudged. No one offered a summary. There was nothing to add that wouldn't turn the day into a story, it wasn't. I switched on the bench lamp. The band I'd set aside days before sat under the light with the seams still waiting for heat. I caught the joint with a bit of flux, breathed once to clear the breath I didn't know I'd been holding, and reached for the torch. The flame found the edge exactly where I had left it. The metal softened and ran true. The seam held bright as a single breath caught in metal. I let the band cool on the block and cracked the office window. Heat lifted out into the alley, taking a measure of the day with it. Nora capped her pencil and slid the folio into her bag. Evan sat a while longer with his hands on his knees, as if the chair itself were steadying him. No one named the outcome we were heading toward. We had paper enough for what was true. The clinic sent a brief note 2 days later, mediation recorded as no agreement. It attached a copy of the unsigned proposal Nora had placed on the table, and a checklist of resources neither of us had asked for, but both of us read through anyway. I filed the PDF with the rest and went back to the bench. Work, like rain, finds its own level. By the end of the week, the first envelope from a collections firm arrived, addressed to Lena at a former address, then another to a current one, and then a handwritten message from a neighbor I barely know. There are men in dark suits waiting on her steps. I called no one. I set the kettle on and watched the spout shudder as it boiled. Evan carried the heavier weight. When he spoke to the landlord at her building about forwarding mail, the man mentioned a notice taped to the door, past due, rent deadline, marked in thick black. The words gathered like stormflies. They didn't demand a response. They made the air hum. On a Wednesday that smelled like hot pavement, a judgment notice arrived from the county clerk's office, a decision in favor of a creditor with a number that reached across the page in blunt strokes. Later that afternoon, a mutual acquaintance said she saw Lena moving boxes into a second-floor walk-up on Marsh Avenue, the kind with a window unit that rattles and a stair rail polished by hands more tired than proud. The report landed without pleasure. The day kept its shape. Shipments, meanwhile, did what we asked of them. The crates left on schedule, Customs cleared with only a routine question about a code Nora had already annotated in red on every manifest. A week later, an email from Klaus Meyer dropped into the inbox at 5:14 a.m. Yeah. Local, the pieces arrived. Impeccable. His assistant Matteo sent photographs that afternoon, my work walking a clean line down a white wall, each piece given sky around it. The gallery's windows threw a rectangle of light onto the floorboards like a quiet stage. For a minute, I forgot how to stand. Orders followed in the plain language that makes sense of long effort. A shop in St. Gallen placed a modest request for Riverstone bands. A house in Zurich West sent a longer list with sizes and delivery dates. A buyer from Luzerne asked for a variation on the cuff. I'd finished the night mediation failed. The numbers weren't lavish. They were exact and fair, and they stacked into something that could be called a season. Evan took those emails like a man opening shutters after weather. He scanned, answered, measured, printed, checked, taped, weighed. One night I woke at 2 and found the office light still on. He had fallen asleep in the chair with a packing list across his chest, pencil tucked behind his ear. I pulled the paper free and turned off the lamp. When he stirred, he reached for my wrist as if we were stepping off a curb. "I'm here," I said. "Lie down." He did, and the office held us both. Nora came by Saturdays with bakery paper under her arm and the kind of conversation that keeps a room in one piece. She reconciled the incoming wires with a neat pleasure that never once bled into triumph. "This is what it looks like when a ledger breathes," she said, penciling a small check mark in a margin. I watched her hands capable and showy and felt my chest loosen an inch. Lena called twice from numbers I didn't recognize. The first time she left a message so loud it distorted, "You've sabotaged me. Family doesn't drag family through mud." The second time she didn't leave a message but texted instead, "You ruined me." The words sat on the screen, not asking to be answered but refusing to go dim. I forwarded the PDF of the letter Nora had written, the same one she'd refused to sign, and beneath it pasted the clinic's list of debt counseling services in the county. Nothing else. No sentence for her to set fire to. The message marked as delivered. I set the phone face down. In August, the air thinned a little. On a late afternoon, I drove the Blue Ridge Parkway until the road felt like a ribbon through green. At the overlook above, craggy families arranged themselves into photographs, and a man tuned a guitar so gently it sounded like someone thinking. I found a place at the wall. The mountains layered themselves into the distance, blue built upon blue, until there was no single ridge you could accuse of being the last. I stayed until the light slid toward evening and then drove home with the windows cracked and the radio off. Back in the studio, the season moved how seasons do. Postmarks, tracking numbers, invoices sent and answered. A new coil of solder opened another, worn to a pale thread. The sound of the polishing motor braided itself with the bakery's morning deliveries, and above the alley we learned to recognize the stride of the mail carrier who whistled a bar and a half of the same song every day. While I set bezels, Evan cut links of Italian chain and counted clasps into small bags. He kept ledger notes in a careful hand, not because Nora needed them, but because writing things down steadied him. One evening he stood at the office window while the bakery closed downstairs. He lifted 2 fingers to the glass as if testing for draft. I kept thinking if I bought enough quiet, he said, the noise would tire itself out. "It doesn't, does it? It fills the room you give it," I said. He nodded, not exactly in agreement, not exactly in loss. He looked at the file cabinet, the second drawer, where the receipts and the clinic papers and the certified slips lay in their clean sleeves. "I'm not checking that drawer every day anymore," he said, as if noticing a weather change. "It's just a drawer." We stayed like that for a time, facing the window that held our reflections over Main Street's small drift of traffic. When the bakery's lights went out, the alley deepened. The elm leaves shook once and then were still. Klaus sent an invitation card from the gallery's autumn calendar, with my name printed small in the right-hand column. The envelope carried a handwritten line, "Your work holds a room without raising its voice," and I set it on the shelf above the bench, where I keep objects that do not require anything from me. Toward the end of the month, the last notice from the clerk's office arrived, final paperwork on the civil matter that began with a drawer and a number too round to share air with sense. I filed it with the others. The cabinet closed on smooth rails. I turned the key because locks are for drawers, not for truth. We took the long way home that night. Evan drove the old route along the creek where the road bends like a bracelet being fitted. On the porch, the evening made a temporary peace with the house. He sat on the top step, elbows on his knees. "You're not angry with me anymore?" he asked, into the kind of quiet that can hold a difficult question. "I was never angry at you," I said. "I was startled by what you carried alone." He exhaled that hollow-throated sound men sometimes make when the body realizes it can stop bracing. "I wanted to keep the work clean," he said nearly to himself. "You did," I said. "You're doing it now." Inside the studio waited the way rooms wait objects in their places, light pooled where habit leaves it. I set the finished band on a velvet insert and closed the lid. The office clock marked its small seconds. From the alley, a cat spoke once and then remembered it had nothing else to add. I turned off the bench lamp, checked the window latch, and locked the door behind us. The air outside smelled faintly of flour and rain. Evan held the rail for the first step and then let it go. The street took our weight without complaint, and we walked toward the car, unhurried, the day arranged into what it was willing to be. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.